Hello, my name is Kimberly Bonfiglio, and this presentation was created as part of my graduate studies at Arizona State University. In pursuit of a master's degree in sociology, I was afforded the opportunity to explore a topic of interest to me and to create a mechanism whereby I might promote social change. The topic of my presentation is centered around an issue that has recently captured national attention. One need only turn on the nightly news or poke around on the internet briefly to learn that somewhere in our country, a suspect has been wounded or killed by a police officer. Varying degrees of protest and civil unrest have become common occurrence and present across the nation. Some argue, like this photo demonstrates, that law enforcement practices are problematic. And to this end, it seems as though there might be a pattern. Just as one situation leaves media attention, a new situation arises whereby an unarmed person is shot and killed by law enforcement. Many believe that law enforcement is abusing their powers. When these situations are captured on cell phones and posted online for the world to see, the public demands answers. I imagine as you look at this slide, there are names that must be familiar, whether it be Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, or Michael Brown. The fact remains that while some things make national attention and we all hear about, the list of names that could have been on this slide is overwhelmingly into the hundreds. Unfortunately, as tension escalates regarding perceptions of excessive use and force, the fact that the U.S. government does not have reliable statistics in this regard only adds fuel to the fire. Nobody knows how many people are killed by law enforcement yearly. Ongoing absence of data creates the illusion that there is something to hide and that the government does not care, which creates instability within society, as evidenced by public protests nationwide. The director of the FBI, James B. Comey, said in 2015, "The first step to understanding what is really going on in our communities and in our country is to gather more and better data related to those we arrest, those we confront for breaking the law and jeopardizing public safety, and those who confront us. Data seems a dry and boring word, but without it, we cannot understand our world and make it better." While reduction of police brutality is indeed a cause for action, it is difficult to gauge the extent of this problem without data. As a nation, we have no idea how pervasive this problem might be and what factors exist to contribute to what is believed to be a major problem. As such, this presentation presents a call for action to lawmakers across the nation. Further, is it a call to you, whomever is watching this video, to initiate action. In the court of public opinion, law enforcement in America has overstepped its authority, especially towards non-whites. As indicated by the graph, Hispanics and blacks demonstrate significantly less confidence in police to treat them equally to whites. Here on this slide, we see that nearly 3 out of 4 Caucasians believe that everyone is treated equally, while just under half of Hispanics and only 4 in 10 of blacks would agree. There's also a significant amount of distrust in the ability of law enforcement to appropriately engage with suspects. As you can see from this slide, faith in law enforcement to use appropriate force and the belief that law enforcement is held accountable when they do not varies by race. A significantly larger number of African Americans having more negative view on both areas. Striking from this researcher's point of view is the fact that only 25% of all people would assess the police's use of force as good or excellent. Likewise, only 30% of all people believe that the likelihood of police being held accountable for misconduct is good or excellent. Clearly, there is a significant overall degree of public mistrust when it comes to the use of force. One might speculate that as more cases are televised via media and the internet, that the public's faith in law enforcement is deteriorating, while the perception of racism within law enforcement grows. Research by the Pew Research Center bears this out. As of 2015, there are more people in the U.S. that view racism as a big problem than there were 6 years ago. 50% of all Americans say racism is a big problem compared to 5 years ago when only 33% felt this way. This increase is taking place across all regions of the United States, both political parties and all demographic groups. However, not all racial groups share the same viewpoint. 73% of African Americans, 58% of Hispanics, and only 44% of Caucasians view racism as a big problem. Like this House, the tools currently used by the federal government to gather data regarding the use of force are outdated and severely flawed. The U.S. government has 3 main ways that it collects information, and all are subject to underreporting. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Uniform Crime Report collects data on all homicides in the U.S. via the Supplemental Homicide Report. Data is reported directly from participating agencies. Unfortunately, participation is voluntary, and many law enforcement agencies simply don't report. The arrest-related death program, supported by the Bureau of Justice, relies on reports from each state regarding deaths of those in custody. Each state and the District of Columbia has a state reporting coordinator. Both the Supplemental Homicide Report and the Arrest-Related Death Report are based on state law enforcement agencies and do not include federal reporting agencies. The final collection method is via the Center for Disease Control National Vital Statistics Program. This program collects data from recorded death certificates, which are submitted by coroners' offices. The problem is that countless studies indicate that the data collected by the federal government is often incomplete. States are all too often underreporting their data by as much as 50%. Supplemental homicide reports and the arrest-related death program reports are not submitted consistently. Even when the ARD and SHR systems are combined, data is 28% missing. Further, there's an issue with transparency. The arrest-related death program is not publicly available. All of the above is likely to give the public the impression that the government does not care to collect quality data about the use of force. Further, some would argue that a lack of effort to truly study this issue is in essence sanctioning inappropriate and excessive force against minorities. Again, the Center for Disease Control Statistics collected through the National Vital Statistics Program is flawed. Among many different demographics, local and state medical examiners and coroners typically fill out reports for every death and note the cause of death. However, the coroner may not include that the cause of death was a result of a police shooting or use of force. There are 3 main reasons for this omission. The first is that the forms are often very vague about how to complete the death certificate form. Number 2, the coroner and medical examiner sometimes have inconsistencies. Whereas the cause of death might be bleeding out, they may not put on the death certificate that the cause of mass bleeding was because of a gunshot wound. Close relationships with law enforcement and legal departments in the city may also prevent a coroner from disclosing information that might be damaging to the police department. Again, not all methods are created equal. Knowing that the government is consistently receiving incomplete data, more must be done to adopt a methodology that will improve data collection. Data from states should be reliably reported. It should include relevant information necessary to assess the circumstances involved, and it should be transparent to the public as much as possible. It is time to fix the situation. Unfortunately, lack of reliable data has been well documented and long-standing. For decades, the United States government has known that their ability to accurately collect and report police use of force data has been marginal at best. Despite numerous laws and policies put forth to gather data via the Bureau of Justice's Arrest-Related Death Program, the CDC National Vital Statistics System, and the FBI Supplemental Homicide Reports, research consistently indicates that our country has knowingly grappled with our inability to gather complete data since the early 1970s. Failure to take this issue seriously for decades increases the public's distrust of the criminal justice system, and significantly decreases faith in our politicians to police the police. Like the weak links in this chain, existing reporting strategies are simply ineffective. Accountability is the obligation of an individual or organization to account for its activities, accept responsibility for them, and to disclose the results in a transparent manner. Many would argue that this is not taking place. While the public may legitimately argue that reform is necessary, it will be important to know more details about the use of force in the United States so that we might measure if interventions are effective. Such data might also shed light upon what kinds of incidents result in the death of a suspect at the hands of law enforcement so that interventions are targeted in the right direction. One step in the right direction is the passing of the Death and Custody Reporting Act of 2013. This federal law requires that each state report to the Attorney General on a quarterly basis and pursuant to the guidelines established by the Attorney General, information regarding the death of any person who is detained, under arrest, or is in the process of being arrested, or en route to be incarcerated. Failure to comply with this edict will result in a 10% loss of federal funding allocated for local law enforcement purposes via the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Street Act of 1968. This is a substantial amount of money. Last year alone, the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance, also known as Byrne JAG program, awarded funds to all 50 states ranging from just under $500,000 to as high as $19 million. This program, the Byrne JAG, is only one of many that this new law might impact. However, this law, the Death and Custody Reporting Act, is not entirely new. The federal government has passed similar laws in the past that did not yield better data. Though the Death and Custody Reporting Act of 2013 requires reporting to the Department of Justice, it does not stipulate mechanisms for how this data is to be collected and reported. Only 2 states mandate reporting from law enforcement officials. 26 states rely primarily upon open source media reports of police-involved incidences revolving in death of suspects or those in custody. Surprisingly, this source of information is often more reliable than actual reports from law enforcement agencies themselves. As you can see on this slide, there's 5 or 6 different ways for which a state will get information to report to the Bureau of Justice. And again, every state is using a different method, and each method being used is flawed, and only 2 states, California and Texas, are using a mandated reporting. As such, California and Texas are leaders in their field. For every use of force incident within the state of California and Texas resulting in serious injury or death, law enforcement must report the following to the California Attorney General. Texas demands the same of their law enforcement officials regarding death while in custody or as a result of use of force. Failure for other states to follow suit with California and Texas may indicate to the general public that there is a disregard for the gravity of the issue and that states are not taking seriously their need to protect all citizens from potential abuse at the hands of law enforcement. Approved in 2015, California AB 71 is a fresh start and a path to accountability and transparency. Every use of force incident within the state of California resulting in serious injury or death, law enforcement must report the following information to the California Attorney General: the agency information and location of incident, the primary reason of contact between the suspect and law enforcement, information about what the underlying incident was. Also included are the number of civilians and officers involved, if the civilian was perceived to carry a weapon, if the civilian was found to have a weapon, what the weapon type was. Also noted is the civilian level of resistance. Type of force used by both the officer and the civilian are noted on the form. The severity of injury to the civilian or officer and medical aid received by civilian or officer are also included. Finally, demographic information regarding the civilian and the officer, in addition to the officer's attire and other observed civilian behaviors, are also included. Such examples, not incidences of this, would be mental disability, physical disability, drug or alcohol impairment, or even developmental disability. The one factor not included in the California AB 71 is suicidality and mental health status, which I think is something that they might want to include in their form in the future, given the propensity for some to directly engage with law enforcement as a means to commit suicide. This data would likely be useful. But as you can see, this particular accountability mechanism will allow researchers and policymakers to study the incident and get a very clear picture about what was involved in the incident that led to the use of force that resulted in injury or death. Since the 1970s, our federal government has been faced with research report after research report, often created by the hands of our own government, that tells us that our nation has no idea about the breadth and depth of police brutality in our country. I find as a researcher that this is very disturbing. If you see something, you should say something. If something is important to you, you will find a way. If not, you will find an excuse. From this researcher's point of view, too many excuses have been put forward and not enough action has taken place to discover the data that will help us make a difference. It is the belief of this researcher that unless states do a better job of collecting and reporting information, the situation will not change. Unless states implement mandated reporting and institute negative sanctions for failure to report, it is inconceivable that the status quo will not continue. It's time to change and demand transparency. To summarize this presentation, I would like to simply say that the policy recommendation put forth is that all states in the United States should support DRCA and adopt mandated reporting within. It is not only what we do, but also what we do not do, for which we are accountable. Data must be diligently collected and forwarded to the U.S. Attorney General, not only so that states can maintain federal funding, but also to demonstrate to the public that states have a vested interest in addressing the issue. Gone are the days where law enforcement agencies should be allowed to decide if they're going to participate in reporting incidents in their local areas. Given that each law enforcement agency must already complete paperwork and investigation upon all uses of force, it is not believed that forwarding of such reports to the state would incur any undue hardship or cost upon local law enforcement agencies. In the event that it does, it is recommended that each state incur those costs in lieu of creating barriers to 100% compliance. There's too much to lose as a result of failure to report. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my presentation. It is my hope that after you have listened to the data and are aware of the mandated reporting taking place in California and Texas, that you might encourage your legislature in your home state to adopt similar reporting. Until we find the data, it's going to be difficult to move in the right direction. Thank you and have a nice day.